All right, so this is the 11th episode of On That Note. I am here today with Courtney, Swain, and Ben Levin from Bent Knee. They are just fresh off the stage over at the Crescent Ballroom. They're on tour. And
pineapples. Dirt.
I'm here to talk to them about their amazing musicianship. So where I would like to start is on the album that you guys put out, Land Animal. It's very clear that you guys put a lot of detail into tone, and whether it's vocal tone, synth tones, guitar tones. And I was curious, did you guys, during the course of your musical education, feel as if you got good instruction about tone and how to create different tones to have different effects?
Well, mostly no.
Mm-hmm.
I got one really good tip about tone. One person said what makes a professional guitarist is tone and time. Mm-hmm. So it's basically that tone matters, and don't be too bashful about being loud. And I think I failed mostly at both of those for the longest time. I mean, maybe even still with the volume thing. But I had a Boss GT8 pedal with an Ibanez Gem, and I didn't own my own amp for the majority of the time I've been playing, and the two just didn't work together because the Gem by itself didn't really sound good clean, just straight in. It just didn't it needed effects, and then the effects I was using, it was like I didn't know what I didn't know, and they were like good for what they were, but they weren't like what I have now, which is the main difference between what I have now and what I had then is now from mixing albums and stuff, I know like what the guitar could be that it wasn't, and yeah, I just did a bad job. That was a huge weakness. Yeah, working on it. I think I'm good now. It's pretty good now. I get compliments from sound people.
That's how you know it's legit.
Yeah.
What about you vocally, Courtney?
Yeah, very, very little. Yeah, I don't think I actually spend a lot of time teaching that myself now. Mm-hmm. Because I think, I think it's a really interesting part of the voice to experiment, and I think it's a good thing to start early before you sort of like get comfortable with like a certain thing. And I think it's also a really good way to sort of put away the sensitivity and the vulnerability that you encounter a lot with singing, where you're sort of like where you're forced to treat it more like an instrument than you and how you convey yourself. Yeah, that
makes a lot of sense. Why do you guys think that it's not something that's covered in curriculums? Because it's obviously very important and has a huge impact on the like emotional effect of your music or your composition. Why do you think it's something that's left out?
For guitar, it's very ephemeral. You can take a chalkboard and teach someone theory. Mm-hmm. So you can have a group of people silently with pens learn theory pretty well. And then with the right assignment, apply it and integrate it into their music. I mean, I think you could theoretically have an instrument-free theory class and have people get really musical results. Ideally, there would be instruments, but you could. So you can set up a whole academic system around that with 4 semesters that logically lead into each other. With tone, it's like your opinion, my opinion, and I think the best way to teach it would have people mix whole bands, and then they see how each instrument best fits together, and then you can make your tone decisions based on not like how does a guitar sound at its best, but how does a guitar fit at its best. Because there's never, unless you're playing solo, there isn't really a vacuum seal around the guitar. It's like, how does it fit when I play like this against the keyboards and the violin? Those are 2 things that really conflict with it. So it's just hard to build a curriculum around that. And every single band instrumentation will need a different thing. So it's, you might as well learn to mix. Mm-hmm. So there's whole majors for that. I guess, that would be the mixing major. The production major would be the tone major. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that there's like a lot of categories that we work in musical education with the top ones being like pitch, intonation, rhythm, timbre, phrasing, all that stuff. And I think different instruments have different focal points. Like, like you have to start with something. Drums, you obviously start with rhythm. And I feel like for a lot of things, tone comes later. My two guesses would be one, because you have to develop a palette of, like, I think it's hard when you're focusing on so many other things. Like when you teach, it's really, I've learned that it's really inefficient to, if someone plays something, to be like, okay, here are the 5 things you should try. You should just be like, okay, try this.
Here's one thing.
Yeah, and so like you can't be like, all right, your rhythm was sloppy, your intonation was bad, and your tone, it's just too much. So you don't get to tone. And I think the other reason is that I think tone is more malleable than rhythm. Like, when you think about like even if you're playing like a standard or a jazz standard, or even whatever you're playing, if you're playing like just a standard rock beat or whatever, depending on who you're playing with and what the needs of the ensemble are, I feel like the tone you want to end up is very different. And I think this goes in hand with what Ben was saying, but like sometimes the best guitar tone is not the best sound that you hear on its own. Like I'm always surprised when I hear like metal bassists, like Liam Wilson from Dillinger, or even like Connor from Haken, or Simon from Leprous, who we're on tour with. The bass sounds ridiculous on its own. It's like jump, like it just sounds like there's this huge low end, and then there's this crazy high end that sounds like you're just like throwing a bag of change, like chun 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 like that. But it doesn't sound awful. It sounds weird on its own, but that's like the tone that works in
the ensemble.
And but you wouldn't want to like go to every bass class and be like, here's the tone, like that would be awful.
That's true. Cool. And then if you want to grab those transcriptions, I was going to have a couple of questions from them.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, this is cool, huh?
Yeah. I can play the Sibelius file too, because you can hear how easy it sounds. But one of the things that was really interesting to me is obviously the synthesizer, or I'm not sure exactly what instrument. I know on some of your live versions, Chris plays it on the pizzicato on the violin.
True.
But that pattern obviously is sort of in a separate time signature, or is free flowing over the time signature over the bar. And how did that come about? And was that, where in the writing process did that occur? I'm always curious about the order of things.
So when you have something that's in quintuplets, when you have complicated stuff, generally it's helpful to have something simple against it. So I think that was a philosophy that was continuous throughout Land Animal. We were listening a lot to this artist Nick Bartsch from Switzerland, who builds these rhythmscapes of 3s and 5s and 7s and all this stuff, but it doesn't sound like math. It doesn't sound like carefully plotted objective calculations that play themselves out. It sounds like something that appeals very deeply and gets you to move and just feels right. And that's because of the balance and the structure to it. So that particular part, ding da da ding da 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 ding da 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 ding da, it's just nice to have something simple and melodic that repeats. And then the quintuplet, the quarter note at the end of that is like the backbeat. And so just the relationship of the ding da da dun da with that backbeat is sort of the foundation of that rhythm. So it there was no. I think it probably came right after the drum part. Okay. It was like probably the second thing that came in.
Was the drum part the first thing that came out of this song?
Yeah, like. Yeah, probably improvising the kick on MIDI. I think that's what happened there. And then, ding da da ding ding. It's probably the second thing that happened. I remember that pretty well. Actually, that moment.
And then Courtney, when you come in with this triplet rhythm over a quintuplet hi-hat thing. But what's interesting is like something about the human voice is somewhat detached from rhythm, in that like if that was played on a guitar, if that melody was played on a guitar or a keyboard or something, that 3 against 5 would be very like invasive,
right.
like
Someone
in your face.
Could, yeah. Yeah.
What do you think it is about the human voice that like we don't we don't feel rhythm in the same kind of like super gridded way or whatever it may be?
I think it depends on the aesthetic, but for me, like I think about phrasing a lot. Like I don't want to end up sounding like someone could lift me up. You know, always a lot of times I'm thinking about like the bigger phrase. And as a vocalist, something that I've struggled with is that I'm really impatient. So for a long time, I tended to sort of ride on the front side of the beat, and it's not very helpful. And so I think, you know, right around like this album, I was thinking a lot about sort of laying back, and especially because the rest of the ensemble is playing so mechanically in this context, I think that vocal line works more out than in. It sort of is like provides a contrast in the same way that the synthesizer is providing like a cyclical contrast to the, you know, like the more sort of spastic like rhythm section.
Because sometimes like when you do go to that high D towards the end of the verse, it's landing in a different spot rhythmically because of the odd time behind it.
Yeah.
And is it just something where you're thinking purely melodically and phrasing, or are you actually ever kind of sitting down and being like, all right, even though this lines up, or I want this to line up in a different spot, or it does line up in a different spot, or is that ever a thought?
Well, this is actually most of Ben's writing here. I think it's really great in hindsight, but at the time he had to like really pinch and push me to sing it. But I do think it's really cool how it offsets. I think you probably have a better idea there.
It's kind of improvising, singing over it, because like usually with vocals, I used to write them out. I mean, generally, there's for every song, there's a different approach to vocals in this band. So this isn't like this isn't how vocal parts come to be in Bentley, but in Ben Levin group before. I would back in like 2010, I would write out rhythms, and then I would listen to them in finale so many times, and then I'd put lyrics to those. And I hate that sound now. Like, I don't like the sound of like usually I just don't like that. And so the way I like to come up with vocal melodies now is to improvise singing over things, or just to start with the vocal melody over like pads, because the voice isn't just like, it's not like other instruments. The notes aren't really notes, they're gestures of humanity. You know, you're dealing with a person talking to you through melody, and that doesn't register the way notes on a marimba do. So like trying to even find parallels between them is more of an experiment than like the thing you should start with necessarily. And so so that this would have happened from just this groove with the synth part and singing over it while holding down the chords that end up forming that ends up forming in the keyboard. That's probably how.
I think it's also a stylistic thing where I think that's the reason it's pop music and it's not like contemporary classical in a way. Like the attitude of the vocal there. I think that's like I don't know if there's like a really distinct line between pop and what's not pop, but I feel like that vocal line is like what really pushes into that pop realm.
There's a lot of music that focuses on the scaffolding. It's like, if we take these concepts and put them together, what music will we get? And that often is the way that contemporary classical is born. It's the scaffolding, and then you build on top of it. And I think with pop music, it's you're trying to very clearly communicate some vocal gesture and then support it, just stereotypically speaking. So,
that's very interesting. And then the synth pad, which actually was the very last thing I heard. I had like everything else mapped out, and then I was like, oh my gosh, there's a pad in the background. At what point did that come into the composition, where it's really succinctly outlining those chords?
Probably while I was singing the it would have probably been like, no musica pura, sama kana puri, just like gibberish while holding chords down. That's probably what happened.
Got it. And there's an interesting point, like over that C harmony, there's no synth pad happens over that C before it goes back to the F. Was there some sort of, like national treasure, like meaning behind that, or was it, I was curious about that. Why was one left out?
What's National Treasure?
It's a movie with Nicolas Cage.
He finds clues and everything.
Everything means something, like kind of like the Da Vinci Code, sort of. Everything is a conspiracy.
I think originally the synth pad played through. It was like a so it was holding through, but I felt like I felt like it served the song, the rhythms better when it was drier and those parts. So when it's cutting out, it just highlights the part a little better. And when it was holding through, it was just like it was just too much information, too much happening. So I felt like when it was cutting, it was kind of giving this sort of on-off kind of feel. Like to me, this song feels like like electrical circuits sort of like turning on and off, So like if you're thinking of like, it's kind of like a watching like, there's like crazy dominoes where, it's like going around and these things happen and, like a kind of channel something. So it's just, the whole thing feels like a big machine that's kind of like turning on and off, and you're like drawn to these like different places. But I think ultimately, I feel like this song took a really long time to get under like our fingers, and I think it was because it's easy to get caught up on the technicality of it, in a way, and it took us a long time to just like internalize it to the point where we were just kind of like not thinking about it. And by a long time, I feel like it took us like a couple years.
Yeah.
I guess the album hasn't been out that long.
Well, I still think we could play it better.
Yeah.
To me, it's supposed to be a broken beat like in hip hop with a nice poppy hook on top of it, but it's like a very different approach to that effect that ultimately there aren't a lot of analogies for it. So I don't think we intuitively own this song the way we own other ones where we just know what it should be.
Well, I think like the moment you start thinking about the rhythm, it falls apart. So now we've learned to play it without thinking about it, but it's not accurate.
Right.
So it's like that sort of like, we never...
The catch-22.
Right, yeah. We never learned to play it like completely fluently in a way where we're just not thinking about it, it's just coming out. I think.
The recording's quantized.
Yeah.
We don't play it quantized. Yeah.
Right.
Same thing with Terrorbird. Our metric modulation in the first verse and like later in the song is supposed to be a quintuplet modulation, but now we do it to sextuplets because it's easier. This is what ended up happening.
Right, yeah.
It's all a sham.
It wasn't a choice. It just sort of like became that.
It's like, oh, this feels right.
Yeah.
And we never learned how the 5 feels right.
Yeah. 5's hard.
That's cool.
It was cool that you did this.
Yeah. No, it was, and I was very happy to. It was an educational kind of experience as well, as you could imagine. So it's like, because you guys are so technically proficient, you guys have so much training and so much knowledge. Where do you ever struggle with restraint, and like what kinds of things do you do to safeguard against that, or like what kinds of conversations do you have around that?
I think Courtney and I struggle with restraint more than, say, Vince and Jessica. I mean, Courtney has a lot of pretty proggy ideas, and I have a lot of pretty proggy ideas. And they kind of come out as, like, things like that fill, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And sometimes it's good. Like we have this new song where Courtney did a lot of the, elaborating on the initial seed, where it goes like, da dun 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 dun. There's nothing. If you plot it out, it doesn't really repeat.
Yeah, the other day I was thinking about it when we were playing, and I was like, what are the people feeling? Like,
yeah.
It's such a strange section, like to me, It's like, I think what happens is like in our heads, we're just like, oh yeah, like this is like clearly, oh, I hear it, and then we don't feel it until later. We're like, what's happening? It's kind of how a band name is. Like, we're like, Benny, oh, whatever,
sure, whatever.
And then we're like, oh, that is a really strange name.
And like that particular example works, but then other times we'll be like, it just doesn't. And that's when Vince, I would say Vince and Jessica, so everyone's restrained in different ways and not restrained in different ways. Like Chris is very restrained, I think, with keeping orchestration simple, but then he's less restrained with ambience. He'll use a lot more reverb and tail and make things big. They'll be simple and big. And then you have Jessica, where I think maybe she writes the simplest things. Sometimes Vince is a hardcore minimalist, maybe even more than her. Gavin, depending on how sleepy he is, he might be like, I'm just gonna go doom, da, doom, doom, for like the whole song. But then other times he's like, So it's hard to like put everyone in a box, but the answer is yes. Simply, we have a hard time with it, and that's why we're a team of 6 people and not one despot.
Yes.
Yeah.
That would be important. I also do like the image of Courtney writing something and then like somewhere late in the process she just realized, oh, there is an audience somewhere. Yes, the audience does exist after all.
Right.
And then moving away from some more of the compositional questions, one thing that I've noticed about you guys and just the band in general is obviously, again, mentioning you guys are very well educated. You guys have a very strong technical and theoretical background. But it seems like more so than other bands that I've seen, you guys are really into learning how to be creative and learning, like honing that kind of as a separate skill. So what kinds of things do you do in order to learn creativity kind of, or to push yourself in that direction? And what would you recommend that other people maybe try?
That's a really interesting question. I feel like musically speaking, just listening to stuff that's out of your comfort zone, I think is really important. Recently I've been making a playlist where I trade songs with other people, and it's been really, really cool. And there's so many lists, if you just go and look, like Chris, our violinist, Chris Baum, every year goes and listens to NPR's, like top 100 albums from the year. And I did a little bit of that this year, and there was so much that I missed that I was just like, what in the world? It's like so cool. And yeah, I think that's really important. And also sort of as artists in general, I think I've been getting a lot recently personally out of just that, like not even, I don't want to say dabbling or experimenting or just doing visual art, and just sort of having a different perspective and sucking at it, and then just kind of like being like, okay, that experience I think also connects in a way to your creative brain, maybe not like tangibly where like not necessarily that, like my drawing of this tree inspired me to write this song so much as like, I think it just kind of like sometimes when you're stuck, it keeps you moving in like a different direction.
Yeah, I think creativity is a ecosystem. It's not like, oh, I want to be good at music, so I'll specifically work on music. It's more like, I want to be good at problem solving. I want to be good at flexibility. I want to be good at fighting writer's block. And those skills come from a whole ecosystem of creative activities. So like when you spend some time fiddling at a piano and then drawing and making jokes, having stimulating conversation that's about something you never talked about before. Like all these things warm you up. So then when it's time to make whatever it is you're like on purpose making, like a song, you have an angle, a point of entry. It's just like, well, You know, I heard some guy at a gas station yesterday say, if I were really lucky, I wouldn't have any luck at all. And I was open to hear that and think really hard about what that could have meant in his story, and I thought of a whole bunch of shit, but that's just because I'm, like, warmed up.
Mm-hmm.
And stuff like that happens more and more and more when you're warmed up. Like, so I think a lot of people make this mistake. They're like, I'm a composer. And then it's time to compose.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like you're warming up all week for that moment. You're warming up. So, yeah, you just have a journal, draw, tell jokes. I think jokes are really important because that's like the hardest thing for me, at least, for like improv, trying to get people to laugh. It's so hard, actually. Anyway, yeah, it all helps.
It all kind of...
Yeah.
Got it. And then last question I kind of have is, like, if you guys look back, like, what is one thing you would have changed about your musical education, or one thing maybe that you wish you had learned earlier? Obviously, you know, keeping in mind that learning, everything occurs at its own rate, and obviously there's that progress. But if you could kind of go back and tell younger you one thing, or like really espouse one kind of lesson, what would it be?
Well, I have a douchey answer.
What is that?
Being a genius doesn't help you.
Okay.
So I thought I was a genius, and I still think that, and it's just something I think.
Mm-hmm.
I've always thought it. And it doesn't matter if I'm right or wrong. It's very unhelpful to believe you are, and it's unhelpful to believe you aren't. People have genius moments, so you could say lots of people, way more than you'd think, are genius, or you have untapped genius. But it's a paradigm that is unhealthy and unuseful. So what's better is to be like, if you do think you're a genius, be like, you realize a lot of genius goes to waste, so you'd better take some constructive criticism and not look at other people as inferior and like, what do they know, but get ready to like really genuinely try someone else's idea. I could have used that earlier. I definitely have that now. I've been super like anti that thought process. I think it would really, really good for Kanye West. I think he'd be a little bit like happier. I really feel for him and Elon Musk right now. I think they're the same guy, like, where they don't fit into society. They've done something really good that a lot of people love, and they don't know what the heck's going on, and they're just flushed. I don't feel bad for them that they're rich, but but being rich doesn't mean you're happy. Yeah, whatever. You get the idea.
I do get the idea.
I'm not like them though. They're better.
What about you,
You're
Courtney?
better in a different way.
Right. It's useless thought. You know, it's like not it's hard. It's very poisonous. The words around it aren't good. The social reaction to it isn't good. It's very unhealthy.
Yeah, for me, I think, this is musical and also a lot about me as a person too. But I wish I had learned to socialize and to have fun more in music. For me, for the longest time, I think I was really latent to recognize that, to really accept that I really wanted to do music. It was just always kind of like this background thing where, I think I kind of, for a long time, I thought I wanted to be like an archaeologist or even a music historian, but I didn't really think about music. I wanted to be in music, but I didn't think that I wanted to do music, or I didn't think it was good enough. And then I went from that to a hard pivot to music as a lifestyle and as my career and my profession. And very recently I've just come to realize that I have a terrible relationship with music. I just I'm not capable, I envy Ben very much, in this where I don't have a relationship with music where I am like excited to just sit down and like see what comes out, you know, like I'm just realizing I'm having this writer's block because like I've painted myself into this corner where everything I write has to be profound, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And I know all the if I were, you know, not myself, and if I was talking to myself, I know all the things that I would say, like, you know, like, oh, you know, write something or, you know, like write something instrumental, or, you know, try something else, or, you know, learn modular synthesis. And these are all things that, you know, I want to do, but I just don't like, it's not a priority in my life, and I think that's up. I'm trying to fix that. Like, I came to this realization because we were having a really rough time at one point when we were writing the current album we're working on, where we were working on it without Gavin, and we kind of got to this point where we had enough songs, but we couldn't finish anything because we didn't have drums, and we were talking about like doing all this improvisation and stuff, and I just had to kind of come to terms, or I kind of came head to head with this thing where I've never really liked improvising. Like, I've never liked sitting in drum circles. I've never liked being in a room and doing improv. I get really anxious and I get really uncomfortable. And I was just kind of like, I sort of was chalking that up to my, I guess, my overeducatedness in music, where I'm just like, you know, this all makes sense to me and I'm seeing it. But it was sort of like, you know, my life, like something that I've worked on over the last couple of years is to be more grateful for the things I have. I just noticed myself being like a magpie, where I was just like, you know, but this could be better, but this could be better, but this could be better. And I think that kind of carries over to my musicality, where I don't know how to just like sit somewhere and just enjoy the music for what it's worth without recording it. You know, it doesn't, it's just like just making music for the sake of making music. That's just something I'm terrible at. And that's something I wish was part of my musical sort of development earlier on.
I like what you said about how you know all the things you would tell yourself, but it's different to do it. Because that's something teachers should think about. There's a big difference between telling people the right thing and like guiding them without telling them what they're going to do, guiding them through the motions so they embody the thing. That's something I'm thinking about. The limitation. So yeah, if you're going to teach composition or something, you should have them writing every week, you know, like, instead of like telling them.
Here's how you should write every week.
That's the tone issue. I think if you were teaching tone, you wouldn't want to tell people, you know, you need your treble to be here and your bass to be there.
It's like, you know, next time you come in with a totally different tone, you know, like like I want it to sound different, but I want you to like it, you know, something like that. Like that's way more fruitful than like assigning a tone. Yeah,
that makes sense. And then, do you guys want to talk anything about the stuff you got coming up to my, 21 subscribers?
Some plugs?
Yeah,
some plugs?
Yeah.
Plugs.
So this is for YouTube?
Yes.
YouTube.
So, well, I wasn't thinking of plugs. I was just thinking of like subscribership stuff. I think this is very good that you're.
No, I mean like for your
this.
guys'.
I know. I'm thinking of how I can plug you. Now I'm thinking about you.
Well, you're on. You're plugging me.
Well, I want to say that.
Thank you for subscribing.
Thank you for subscribing. Yeah, I don't like doing interviews, but then I was like, oh yeah, last time we talked to Jacob, his questions were so thoughtful. Like, I don't enjoy a lot of interviews. What shit is this?
This is nice.
This is nice.
I've never been handed a score of my own.
Yeah, and congratulations on
you.
getting to the 11th episode. That's a lot of work.
Yeah, that's a lot of work.
To keep going into 11 is a lot.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
But when do you guys got the next album? You guys are working on the next album? You said you're recording it in December. Do you guys have an idea of when it might be released? You're on tour now, so I don't know if this will get edited by the end of the tour, but if you get like the last days, you should definitely go see them. Yeah. But do you guys have any solo tours coming up or any album information? Also, subscribe to Ben's YouTube channel.
I put out, definitely. I put out an album every year on my own for sure. That's something I do sort of like as a ritual. It makes me
Ritual
happy.
sacrifice. Yeah.
Yes, because yes, it is a sacrifice because it will never, or well, not never, but probably will not. I will not get the full love
you
it
have
deserves.
To shed your skin.
Yeah, I gotta shed my skin.
Yeah.
Exactly. It won't get a PR campaign. It won't get a ton of music videos necessarily. Maybe it will, but it won't.
You've been animating a lot.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's a new outlet, but yeah. So yeah, I do that. I have no plugs. I just want to say like it's very good that you're doing this. I'm just like, I hope. I just hope you keep it up because on YouTube things just it's old after a week.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing is, when you pass a certain threshold, people then go back to your old stuff and if you've been trying your best the whole time and like asking the kinds of questions you ask and these kinds of insights, it's super useful. You have my permission to post this as a PDF. I think you need someone's permission maybe to get the audio to play in your video, but we can help you with that.
Yeah. I do want to say I think
the robots might.
Yeah.
Well, it's easy usually just to put a link and be like, go listen to it. Then.
Right.
Oh yeah, that's easier. Yeah.
I think the one thing you're missing in this transcription that's sort of important is the backbeat.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Vince has a snare sample, so it's going ga ga ga
2
ga
4 2 4 2 4. It's just always there.
Always on the 2 and the 4.
Yeah, it would just be like a snare or clap.
Good to know. Yeah. I'll go chew out my students for not noticing.
Well, yeah, it's very subtle,
Yeah,
but
very subtle.
it
Very important,
It kind of gives it like this lift.
Yeah.
It kind of like justifies the quirkiness of the groove because
it's so stable.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, like if I were singing this song as just the groove, it would really be boom, 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 but it boom, 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 but it boom.
Yeah.
Boom.
Yeah, see, we don't even need the music. You guys just did it off the top.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Oh man, I love all this paper, cooling me off.
Thank you very much, both of you, for joining, and thank you for making music and teaching people music. It's all hopefully very important.
Thanks.